Alex now, like I said, an American icon when it comes to college football. That's from knowledge and just being the college football genius that he is. And then certainly an American icon in publishing because nobody does it the way Phil Steele does. 352 pages, and his hands are involved in every one of those 352 pages. I don't know how he does it. Phil Steele, how are you?
I am doing great, Robert. How about yourself today?
Doing good. We're actually we're getting kind of a little bit of a bypass on the weather. We've been just steaming down here, and high today is supposed to be 78. It's overcast. We're getting about 3 days of rain,
Wow.
so that's good for this time of year in July. But I wish somehow the weather could take away the COVID-19. That seems to be a thorn, obviously, in everybody's side. And your thoughts as you've watched this, because I know how badly you're like most of us that want college football, and we've all been kind of watching the professionals and what's happened with the Marlins. Is I know Bob Bowlesby came out and said, "Hey, we're still full steam ahead. We're going to learn from how they're dealing with it," but it's not a good sign.
Not a good sign, but I think maybe in a couple weeks after quarantine, they come back and start playing again, then it could be a good sign. We'll see what happens. Nobody really knows what's going to happen, but like Bowlesby said, I think when talking to the head coaches this year, Robert, going over the teams with them, I didn't know what to expect, but they're pretty much all of the same mindset, which is I don't care if we didn't have any spring practices. Next man up. We'll be ready to play. Put the ball on the field. We'll be ready to go. So that fired me up a little bit. And one thing I want to point out to your listeners real quick, Robert, that they may not know is that while I do have something on every page of the magazine there, I rely on Robert Allen for a good portion of my Oklahoma State input that I have in the magazine. So I always go over the team with Robert. I don't miss a single year of not going over it with them because great information on Oklahoma State, a true insider.
Well, and let me ask you this, because since we spoke, uh, there have been a lot of things happen this summer at Oklahoma State off the field with Coach Gundy, with Chuba Hubbard pointing out the shirt. People missed the point. The shirt was just a trigger mechanism. The big part of it was the players want more from Mike Gundy. They want more of a relationship. They want him to be more hands on with them, where he'd kind of become a CEO. As you saw what was unfolding there, and I know you're busy doing a lot of other stuff, what do you think? Is that something that maybe galvanizes this team because Mike Gundy's devoted now to correcting that? Or is this a kind of distraction thing that takes what could be a great season and kind of fractures it up and makes it harder to accomplish?
I think it's something that's going to have Coach Gundy concentrating on fixing the problem, which he will. And I don't know if it's going to be either galvanizing or tearing it apart. I think it's going to pretty much be right down the middle. It happened long enough ago where it's not happening right before the start of football season. And I think he's had plenty of time to address the situation and will address it, be much more sensitive to it. So I think it's going to be just one of those off-field things.
Before we get into Oklahoma State, I told my listeners, my TPTers, triple play texters, if you want to text a question for Phil, you can. 734 has and says, how is Rattler going to do at Oklahoma, and what should we expect from Baylor this year?
Well, with Rattler at Oklahoma, I think he's in a pretty good situation. You're talking about my number one rated quarterback coming out of high school. He's had a complete year in the system, which is an advantage that Jalen Hurts didn't have last year. Remember, Hurts last year was the first Lincoln Riley quarterback that didn't have that extra year in the system. But he did, and Rattler did. Got his feet wet last year, played in 3 games. There's a reason this guy's up there in the Heisman watch list and on the Heisman odds for the season, because an Oklahoma quarterback's going to throw for a bunch of yards during the course of the season. I expect that again this year, probably another 4,000-yard season. He's got good receivers. He loses C.D. Lamb, but he's got good players throughout a receiving corps and protected by a great offensive line. Oklahoma's got their entire offensive line back. I rate it number 2 in the country. So Spencer Rattler will be up there for the Heisman. Oklahoma, naturally the favorites for the Big 12. Now with Baylor, I expect a drop off. I think talking to the coaches this year, it is a tough situation being a first year head coach taking over a team without the benefit of spring practices. And it's tough to learn your players on your team. It's a very difficult situation to be in. I said the experienced head coaches with experienced head teams should be able to jump right through that. But inexperienced coaches trying to take over a team probably going to struggle. Plus, Baylor was at a peak last year. I mean, 11-3. It was 11-1 at one point when they were playing in the Big 12 title game. They lose their outstanding defensive line from last year in Lynch, Roy, and Lockhart. I thought those three were able to rush the passer on every down, allow them to drop 8 back in coverage. And one of the reasons Baylor had one of the best defenses in the Big 12. Now, they do have Charlie Brewer back. There is some talent. And Dave Aranda surprised me before. Go back to 1 year at Wisconsin when he only had 2 returning starters on defense and yet had one of the top defenses in the country again. But I think it's a tough situation for Aranda. And I'll look for Baylor to take a big step back, more to the middle of the pack of the Big 12 and not be a contender this year.
Yeah, and it's really crazy because Mike Yursich, after a year up in Columbus, left Ohio State. He's now the OC for Tom Herman at Texas. He was under Gundy at Oklahoma State. And then Larry Fedora, Mike's original OC when he took the head coaching job at OSU, has made the round, Southern Miss, North Carolina. Now he's Dave Aranda's OC at Baylor. So, there's a definite going to feel like old home week at least a couple of times when we see these guys.
Yeah, and when it comes to Larry Fedora, he got knocked for the final 2 seasons at North Carolina when they went 3-9 and 3-9, but he left some talent on hand for Coach Mac Brown, and also didn't catch a lot of breaks his last 2 years. Suffered through a lot of injuries and things that happened during the games. Lost a lot of close games. So I think Fedora did a better job than he got credit for at North Carolina.
All right, let's talk some Oklahoma State. And I know when you and I talked, obviously the offense, really stands out, especially with Chuba and with Tylen coming back. Since you and I have talked, I think Dylan Galloway decided because of injuries and he's had some real tough shoulder situations to go ahead and hang it up. He has his degree, but I think they'll be okay there. And we've talked about Spencer Sanders. I told you, well, I'm really fired up about the defense, but I kind of noticed because always one of the things I go to first with your magazines, Phil, is the unit rankings, and well, the Big 12 always fares well in offense, but defense, the Big 12 doesn't come up as well with the unit rankings, and would just what do you see with Oklahoma State, and particularly on the defensive side of the ball, because that's where that could be a difference maker or not so much.
Yeah, I think it is going to be key to this season because you look at what's there on offense, and it's pretty much guaranteed Oklahoma State's going to be explosive. You knew that when Chuba and Tylen Wallace both turned down the NFL, and Sanders is returning as well. But, defensively, I think the biggest difference I see is probably up front on the defensive front because last year they were extremely inexperienced. And now you look at the players they have coming back and the experience level coming back. Plenty of players have earned starts. This is a veteran unit up front, and I think they're going to be much improved. Last year, surprisingly, they went from 4.6 yards per carry to 4.3 with the inexperienced front. I think they're even better this year. They've got solid linebackers. The defensive backs are up there. I rate all 3 units in my top units in the front of the magazine, maybe not in the top 25, but I definitely see the potential. I thought last year's Oklahoma State defense was on the young side coming in and still managed to show improvement. This year, 10 returning starters. You got to love that. So I think there's going to be a lot more bite with the Oklahoma State defense this year.
Yeah, and I think where most people are focused in on the other side of the ball is not Chuba and Tylen. They're kind of the givens. If Oklahoma State's going to be dramatically better, Spencer Sanders has to be a smarter, more efficient quarterback. And that's one reason I think Mike Gundy hired Tim Rattay to come in to be kind of that personal tutor to get Spencer over the hump in some areas.
Yeah, and he definitely has the talent to get there. Generally, when you have a freshman quarterback starting for the first time, it's generally there's a learning curve, and there was that for Spencer Sanders last year. I thought some games was great. Other games struggled a little bit, and finished the year with 16 touchdown passes, 11 interceptions. Not overall a great ratio, but what I've seen, Robert, definitely is what you would expect, which is a freshman quarterback moving to a sophomore. You see a lot better ratio, a lot better decisions, and maybe the coach loosening up the reins a little bit, and letting the quarterback go out there and make some plays. Usually, the offense takes a big jump in the second year for the second year of a starting quarterback.
Well, let's move over real quickly before we time is up and talk defense or talk Big 12 in general. And one thing I love about your magazine, and Phil, most people pick it like 1 through 10. Phil's not afraid to pick ties, and you've got a log jam at number 7 with Tech, Baylor, and Kansas State. And the question, just in your Big 12 picks overall, do you see a big dividing line somewhere? And when you pick a tie like that for 7th, is that 3 teams that aren't very good, or is that 3 teams that may jump up and knock somebody off and are pretty competitive? So, how do you see the Big 12 overall?
And there is a reason for picking ties. Let me give you an example. You go back and look at last year's Big 12 standings. There was a tie for first, Oklahoma and Baylor, and then there was a four-way tie for third, fourth, fifth, and sixth at 5 and 4. So generally, when you're playing 9 games, you're going to have teams come up with the same record. And my computer was spitting out that Kansas State, Baylor, and Texas Tech all come up with the same record this year, which is the reason for picking a tie. And you'll find that, and like in the Big 12's case last year, where or actually 8 of the teams finished in a tie somewhere along the line. Only 2 finished in a spot by themselves. But taking a look, I think there is a dividing line this year in the Big 12, and the dividing line for me comes at number 5. I've got Oklahoma at the top. Texas and Oklahoma State are right there, and I think the battle for the game to play Oklahoma in the Big 12 title game comes down between Texas and Oklahoma State. But 2 others to include in that mix, which are very capable of contending. TCU always bounces back big under Gary Patterson. Every time they've had a losing season, which is rare, they bounce back with, I think, a double-digit win season the next year. And with Iowa State, I'd probably have them ranked a little bit higher, Robert. But when you look at their schedule, they've got the toughest schedule of the top 5 teams. Not only do they draw Oklahoma at home, but they have to play Oklahoma State, TCU, and Texas all on the road this year. Now, how much will road games factor in? Crowd noise and things like that? That's still to be determined. But that's why one of the reasons I had Iowa State there at 5. So I think the dividing line in the Big 12 is right there at number 5. Then comes your teams that could very well get to a bowl game, but I don't see them in the mix for the conference title, and that would be West Virginia, Texas Tech, Baylor, and Kansas State. Now, I think Baylor takes a step back, as I mentioned, but they're still a good team. There's still talent there, and Dave Aranda surprised me in the past. Texas Tech, they got to keep their quarterback healthy. Last year, I thought their season took a turn south when he got injured, and I think that Alan Bowman can be one of the best quarterbacks in the Big 12. The big question with him is, can he stay healthy? Other than that, they look improved across the board, and I think you're going to see a vastly improved Texas Tech. West Virginia probably surprised me a little bit last year. I didn't know that they were going to get to 5 wins. I was thinking more 3. They only had, on the defense, West Virginia lost those 2 safeties prior to the year, so they only had 7 returning starters, one of the least experienced teams in the league yet. Got that big win over NC State, beat Kansas State on the road, heck, beat TCU on the road, and now Neil Brown's in his second year with 14 returning starters. A team like Kansas State, it's tough for me to put them down there. The numbers kept coming up. Maybe put Kansas State even 9th. But, Kansas State under Chris Kleiman had a solid year last year. They've got their quarterback back in Skylar Thompson. I think they'll be better throwing the football. My biggest question mark with them is the offensive line. They would lose all 5 starters off the offensive line. But Coach Kleiman feels they'll build a good offensive line, and that's why they could be there. And then picking Kansas 10th, that's pretty much the way to go every year, huh, Robert?
Yeah, unfortunately for our old friend Les Miles. But I will say this: they were better last year, and that win over Boston College was huge on the road for them. And maybe Les can find somebody to pick on this year at some point down the road. Hey, real quick before we let you go, tell folks I already told them about Phil Steele Preview on the Go, which is a great deal. Get the app and You're in there with all the major companies that provide apps, but tell people where they can get Phil Steele for 2020.
I appreciate that, Robert. And, limited distribution this year. Not only did we come out later than usual because of COVID, but we also went from printing a couple 100,000 copies down to about 50,000 copies this year. So very limited distribution. In fact, if you normally go out and find them everywhere, which they normally are, you're not going to do that this year. The only two places you can find them are Barnes & Noble and Books A Million. So if you're out and about, only go to Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. If you go to Target, Walmart, Walgreens, Publix, all those other places, not there. Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, the only two outlets. Or you can go to philsteele.com, or you can get it on the go, as Robert mentioned. But the very limited distribution this year, so make sure you get it early, or else they might end up selling out.
Yeah, On the Go is available at Amazon Kindle, Google Play, and your App Store for Apple. So you can jump in, and then you got it on your phone or your tablet. My wife is big. She just left we just, for the first time, quit our newspaper subscription. I don't get up in the morning, go out to the driveway first thing. It's now on all of our devices, so that's the way we read the newspaper. We're joining the new century. Hey, I always like to leave you with something, and I did a story on this the other day, and I was really proud of my research. It was almost Phil Steelish what I did. I went and looked as all the award watch list came out. I thought, okay, you got the Davy O'Brien for quarterbacks, Doak Walker running backs, and the Blitnikoff for receivers. Then I included the Mackey for tight ends because I thought that would be really the kind of the crucial point. What teams in college football have guys on all four of those offensive watch lists? There's 6 teams. 3 of them are blue bloods: Alabama, Penn State, Georgia. 3 of them are not so blue: Oklahoma State, Iowa State, and Boise State. And then when I went and
Wow.
I said, okay, I'm going to look at which team returns the most yards with their candidates and which team returns the most points scored by their candidates. The most yards, Georgia. And the key there is the transfer quarterback from Wake Forest. He brought a bunch of yards with
Right.
him from Winston-Salem. All right. The key, and then the points, Oklahoma State returns the most points of
Wow.
those teams, and Georgia by a bunch returned the most yards. Iowa State was in a great position because they were second in yards and they were second in points returned. So watch out for Matt Campbell's
Wow.
crew, and that's with Charlie Kolar being both his Bolitnikoff and his Mackey candidate. So that's really pretty good there. But anyway, that's my little research number
I
for
love
Phil
it.
Steele. So
I, I'm gonna now. Can I find that on your Twitter and post that on my account there,
you can,
Robert?
yeah, it was several weeks ago. I did put it on Twitter, and then also the Pokes Report, which is free. It's on the SI Maven network, and that's our site. And that story, it's you can find it back there, or I can probably email that to you later today.
Oh, that'd be awesome. And then I'll make sure I get it out there to my because that's great stuff. I love that. And the beautiful thing about talking to Robert Allen is you always learn something every time. So I appreciate that knowledge, Robert.
Well, the great trade there is when I get a Phil Steele magazine, I learn hundreds of thousands of somethings. So
You're
there you
very
go.
kind. You're very
Uh,
kind, sir.
you're the best. Let's hope each of us have all of us have a good football season. That's what we're all hoping. So
Well, here's what we're going to do, Robert. When football season kicks off, let's do another show to celebrate the fact that we've got football this fall, which I highly believe we're going to be playing football this fall.
let's do that. And by the way, here's another thing I'll give you: Oklahoma and Kansas moved up their openers to 0 week. If we're able to do it, Kansas with Southern
Hmm.
Illinois, Oklahoma, and Missouri State. Oklahoma State's trying to reschedule their opener that they lost with Oregon State on Thursday, September 3rd. I think when they do it, they'll move to 0 week too. Everybody, that's the kind of push in the Big 12. Everybody wants to try and get on 0 week so they can space out those non-conference games, which kind of gives them some leeway with COVID testing and If there's some players that have positives, you have more space in there. So that's something to look for.
Yeah, makes sense. And Iowa State just scheduled Ball State as a
Okay.
non-conference foe. So at the start of the year, replacing Iowa.
There you go. So, hey, Phil, I appreciate it.
Hey, Robert, great talking to you again, my friend. Really, really appreciate it. And thanks for all the tidbits you gave me here today. I really appreciate that as well.
I'll email you that here in a little bit. So,
All right.
all righty.
Thanks, Robert. Great talking football with you, my friend.
Always good talking to Phil Steele, the leader, the most accurate magazine over the last 22 years. Most